Well, hello and welcome to the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live series. My name is Guy Stevens. I am the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. And for the next hour and 15 minutes or so, I will also be the host here of our podcast. I'm excited to have you here joining us today. It is July 2nd. Wow, time is moving quickly, as always. And really pleased to have you here with us today. We've got a great guest with us today, Katie McDonald. We're going to be talking about her work. But before we get there, if this is your first time here and you're just learning about the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, I'll tell you a little bit about who we are. We are a small but national nonprofit focused. Actually, we are located in Maryland, but we work across the country. Our work is really centered around moving away from punitive and exclusionary discipline, outdated behavior management approaches, really trying to support what we call the 5 principles here, which is a trauma-informed, neuroscience-aligned, neurodiversity-affirming, relationship-driven, and collaborative approach. And we do a lot of work trying to really shift away practices and policies and all of these things to ultimately, hopefully, improve outcomes for children and in schools, not only kids, but also teachers and staff as well. So really pleased to have you here today. Encourage you to learn more about us. You can check out our website. But we've got a lot of resources. And again, it's a pleasure to have you here today joining us. And would love to hear in the chat who you are and where you're from. It's always great to see where people are joining us from, and always good to see the familiar names and not necessarily faces, but familiar names. So let us know in the chat who you are and where you're from. Before we get started with the interview here today, a couple of things I want to mention to you. One is, and you may know this already if you've been a regular listener here at the podcast, I want to mention to you a little bit about our podcast sponsor. So we've had a sponsor this year, which has been the Bowman Consulting Group, Doris and Rick Bowman, who I had the pleasure of seeing in person just recently. It was in Texas for the Attachment Trauma Networks Conference, and got to chat with them briefly. And Rick and Doris Bowman are amazing colleagues that do a lot of work, very much in the kind of connection to the work that we do here. They do a lot of work around kind of trauma-informed and neuroscience-aligned approaches. Recently, they have 2 new books that actually hit the shelves. One was called Your FBA is a Fantasy. The other is called Facing the Fantasy, Finding a Way Forward. The FBA book really kind of goes into the problem with traditional functional behavioral assessments and how to create a behavior assessment that is trauma-informed and neuroscience-aligned. The Facing the Fantasy book really kind of lays out a lot of the foundation around what you need to know to kind of shift in these directions of trauma-informed and neuroscience-aligned work. And on a very special website they have set up for us, which we'll share the link of, you can actually get a discount on their book. And I know it says till June, but I talked to Doris recently, and I know they were going to extend that. But you can get a discount, 40% discount on Your FBA is a Fantasy, 25% discount on Facing the Fantasy. You can also come here to learn more about their work. They've got a lot of free resources here. You can learn a little bit more about Rick and Doris as well. Again, highly aligned with the work that we do here at the Alliance. And I want to thank the Bowmans for being a sponsor for our podcast, and really appreciate the work that they're doing out there as well to make a positive difference. So again, check out our podcast sponsor, Bowman Consulting Group. Did want to mention to you real quickly as well, if you are not already a member of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, we do have a membership program. The membership program really was designed to encourage people that believe in what we're doing and support the work. It's a program where you can become a monthly donor for as little as $5 a month, and it helps contribute to the work that we're doing. As a small nonprofit, we don't have large pools of revenue coming in, but we do require some funding to do this work. And if you come to the Alliance website, you actually might be greeted with this banner and a link that says Join the Alliance. If not, you can find it underneath the Take Action link, and you can find out about what you need to do to join the Alliance. And if you join, and again, it starts at $5 a month, when you join, you get certain benefits as well. And additionally, after you join, I send you out a little welcome pack with some stickers, actually stickers like this one here. So anyway, if you're able and interested in supporting work, I would encourage you to think about doing that. So again, we are really delighted here to have our next guest with us, which I'm going to bring up here in a second. But before I do, just a quick reminder, if you are joining us live, let us know in the chat who you are and where you're from, because it's always a lot of fun to see where people are joining us from. And I always love to see where we've got people that are joining us from all across the world. We get people from of course, the United States and Canada and England and New Zealand, Australia, India. So it's always fun to see where people are coming from. With that, let's go ahead and bring our guest up on the stage here. I'm going to read a short introduction here. We've got Katie McDonald with us, who is a educator, consultant, therapist with over 22 years of experience in trauma-responsive schools, neuro-informed teaching and parenting, emotional well-being. Katie has dedicated her career to empowering educators and families through a deep understanding of resilience, often termed the science of hope. So Katie, it's great to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here.
Well, and I feel really lucky because I was fortunate enough to actually get to see you in person here just a few days ago as well, which, I think prior to that, it had been about a year. We were at another event together. And in fact, it's when I saw you present at that other event, I think in Kansas, that I'm like, oh, you've got to come and join us on the podcast sometime. So we've had a long queue, but I'm really excited to have you. And it feels really timely as well, since we were just together in Dallas for the Creating Trauma-Sensitive Schools Conference. So welcome, and thanks so much for joining me here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yep. So I want to have a conversation with you, and a conversation that our listeners will be able to join in on as well if they choose to. But I want to learn a little bit, and I know a bit about you, but I want to share with our listeners as well, kind of who you are and the work that you're doing and all of those things. So we're just going to kind of dive down and talk a little bit about some of the things that you're doing and kind of what brought you into this work. I want to let people know, again, if you're watching live, feel free in the chat to let us know who you are and where you're from. Also, we'll mention to you that we're just going to be really having a discussion today. If, as you're watching, you have a question or a comment, feel free to put that in the chat at any time, and we'll try to get to some questions as well if people have them. So with that, let's get started. I mean, I read a brief bio, and with 22 years of experience, and that goes really quickly, there's a lot more to you. So walk me through a little bit of the who you are story in terms of, what led you down this road of, becoming an educator, a consultant, and a therapist. Tell me a bit about your journey and what led you into this, kind of area in the first place.
Yeah. Well, I didn't ever think that I would be an educator at all. I was pre-law when I graduated high school, and that's what I thought I was going to do. I knew I wanted to advocate for people. And the pre-law thing was really just kind of one of those things. I think, when you're growing up and people ask you to have an answer to that question, what are you going to do when you grow up? It was just the answer I had. It was kind of my stock answer. And
it sounds really impressive. I mean,
yeah, it does.
When I was in high school, I don't know that I had such articulate answers.
Right. Well,
I wasn't sure what I was going to do the next weekend,
Fair. I had a great grandfather who was on the Kansas Supreme Court, and I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world. And so that's where I set my ambitions when I was really little. But I don't know that I was ever really preparing for that future, which is funny because when I look back, I was very clearly preparing for a future in education. I began working in a classroom at my elementary school when I was probably in 4th or 5th grade. Back then, it was the SMH classroom, but it was students who were in an alternative curriculum classroom who, had a lot of physical challenges and didn't have access to the regular ed classroom. Started volunteering in there, did that all the way through high school, took a job working for group homes for adults with developmental disabilities. Special ed was just clearly the path that I was going to land in. Never taught special education. And I ended up at the University of Kansas and started school there, got into the education program. And what I love.
Did you start out in the education program, or did you start out?
I did. I went straight in. Well, you get in as a junior, but I mean that was the plan. Right. As soon as I enrolled, I was like, why didn't I think I was going to be a teacher? So what's interesting though is one of the first assignments you do in like an intro to ed course your freshman year is they have you draw this map, and it's like the map if you get into the School of Ed and the map if you don't. And back then it was really important you did that, because elementary education was a highly competitive program at the University of Kansas back then. I mean, they took 75 students a year, and then you were competing against a few hundred people for most jobs you were applying for. Wow. It's not at all what it is today, we know. But my goal was if I got into School of Education, I wanted to eventually be someone who wrote curriculum and trained teachers. I thought I would be at the university level. And if I didn't, I wanted a degree in neuropsychology. And now I sit here 22 years later, don't have a doctorate in neuropsychology. I do have a master's in social work, but I've been researching the brain and how it works under stress and how that relates to learning for the past 12 years. So it's kind of funny that even though that path didn't really ever seem like it was very linear, I ended up exactly where I kind of wanted to be, advocating for people who need someone to help elevate their voices, and also working with the brain and mental health. So here I am.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Well, and I think I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. But the road is often not what you think it would be. I mean, I think back to when I started school. Actually, my initial declared major was, and this will tell you a little bit how old I am, but TV, radio, film. Okay, so I was a mass communications person, when I first started, and eventually went back and had changed direction. It was biology, environmental science, and here I am today, advocating and. Sometimes whether you're willing or not, life takes you where maybe you're meant to be. And
100%.
Yeah, I love that. I appreciate you sharing that. It's great to kind of get a sense of your background. And as I was listening to you talk about that, kind of where you thought you would be, I'm like, well, that sounds kind of like where you landed now. So, it sounds like you ended up there. So, kind of getting into this work, and I love that you kind of mentioned that connection with, advocating for people, because I think that, one of the themes that I talk about a lot is how there are a lot of kids that are misunderstood in the name of their behavior, and misunderstood kids, of course, are more likely to find themselves on the other end of a lot of well-intentioned but poorly executed behavioral interventions, and a lot of punitive and exclusionary discipline. Very often these are kids that actually need somebody that's advocating for them and advocating for a different approach as well. I would say because much of what we're doing at large is not working. If you look around, many of the things that a lot of our schools are doing in terms of their behavior programs and things like that are just not working for kids that really need help the most. Right. So, you're, and tell me the social work, because I'm kind of curious how that fit in. You started out working in a degree in education, correct? And then you got a master's in social work. Is that?
I did.
Okay. And how did that evolve? I would love to hear that.
That's the newest part of the story, right? So I taught for 10 years in a school building. I was then a consultant for 10 years. And a large part of the consultancy work that I did focused on educator well-being, burnout, compassion fatigue, really helping take care of the mental health of the educator. And from a coaching standpoint, right? I'm in there as your instructional coach. I'm helping you build trauma responsive practices. And with that comes a lot of really helping the individual as well. There was a point, this was post-COVID, when we kind of got everything up and running again. There was a point that I had a handful of teachers that I was working with in just in a coaching relationship. I'm really helping them support trauma responsive practices. And I had a handful of teachers who were showing up to school every day in active mental health crisis. So whether that was suicidal ideation, really significant health challenges that had presented themselves, just things that were completely plummeting their body budget, right? And the help that they needed from me, I didn't have the right letters behind my name to provide. That's really how it felt. Like, I have the knowledge, I have the skills. I always claim that I have, I audited a degree in clinical psychology because my first husband is a clinical psychologist, and we were together while he was doing his doctorate. And so we studied the whole time, right? I was part of the research. I always claim that I have all this extra learning because I'm a super nerd. But I knew that I didn't have the letters to ethically and legally really get them the help they needed, but they were all from rural Kansas. And at that time, Kansas was 48th in the nation as far as our availability for mental health providers, and balanced with our need for support. And it was just this wake-up call for me that we needed more people. So my dream was to get the degree in social work and be able to open a practice that specifically focused on the mental health support of the educator themselves.
Wow.
So that's how I got here.
Mm-hmm.
I graduated with that degree just a couple of years ago, and working on my clinical license now.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So let me go back even further. I know my timeline here is really going in funny directions, but those 10 years that you spent teaching, tell me a little bit about that, and what was in the transition point to kind of leaving teaching and kind of moving into that role as a coach and consultant. And so what brought you there? So tell me a little bit more about the teaching experience that you had and kind of what led you to that next step.
Yeah, I am one of those people who does a little bit of a lot. And so my timeline does, it comes in bits and pieces as we talk about it for sure. So I started teaching in Germantown, Tennessee, which is a Memphis area. And I taught there for a year. After that, I moved to Texas, and I taught in the Irving School District, which I taught in a school that was culturally very different from where I came from. I came from small town Kansas. This was a school where I only had 14 students my first year, but the numbers were amplified, right? So of those 14, I believe 11 of them had IEPs. I only had 2 students where English was their native language. Lots of behavior plans. It was a really rough school when it came to behavior and discipline. I had no idea what I was doing at all. And I very quickly, this all kind of is outlined in the opening of my book. I very quickly learned that.
You mean this book right here?
Yeah, I do mean that book right there. That one. Yeah.
I happen to have a fresh copy of this.
You do?
We're going to dive into this in a bit as well. Yeah, that's great.
No, I learned very quickly that my students were not ready for academics. They just weren't. Most of them were really struggling with reading. Math was not even on the table for a lot of them. And that's all I knew how to do. So I realized really quickly that building relationships was the key there. And so that's probably where my journey into trauma responsive education began. I remember reading, I believe I read Bruce Perry that first year. I think I ran a lot of Dan Siegel.
Probably the boy who was raised as a dog. Was it?
Yes, right. I'm just trying to find resources for what is this. And so I did that. I taught in Texas for a few years. Then I moved back home to Kansas. And it was interesting because there was such a shift in the students I served. So I went from a very high need school to what I believed to be a very low need school. And that first year was
I'm curious about what I believed.
What I believed.
And
what's interesting is a little bit more about my story is that I was one of those kids that was probably high needs, but didn't appear to be. And I just kind of went blind, I think, to the needs that they had. And I really struggled that first year back kind of with purpose and feeling like, what am I doing? Like, I have time to teach reading. What is this? Like, I don't really know how to do this anymore because parents are asking for more homework and they want extracurricular activities and they're doing all of these things. And I'm just used to coming in and like triaging kids, honestly, throughout the day, emotionally. So that year was really hard. The next year I taught, I moved down from 5th grade to 4th grade, and I taught with an amazing team that year. And I kind of got back on my feet and was able to realize, what does it look like to do this trauma responsive thing in a school that doesn't have kids with, scars on the outside kind of deal.
Right.
That led to being able to have the opportunity to be on the 2014 Kansas Teacher of the Year team. And it was through that I then made the decision to leave the classroom and be able to go out and be a teacher of teachers and widen that impact, and take kind of all of that I had learned in these various different types of school districts and say, nope, these practices, they work for every kid. They work for kids who have really high exposure to trauma and kids who need to build resilience, even though their trauma exposures might be low. And that's kind of how I ended up in the consultancy work.
So thinking about that moment in time, thinking about that, the 10 years in the classroom, the experience that you had, the realization that there was a need for, what were the problems that you were seeing, the problems that you were seeing, the struggles that you saw with your colleagues, or the problems that you were seeing in general that made you think, gosh, I need to go upstream from this teaching piece to really, better support educators through coaching and things like that. What were the issues that you were seeing at that point that made you think that this would be something that really was necessary?
I think it had a lot to do with kind of my own journey through compassion fatigue at the time. When I left Texas, I had a group of students that I had become very close to, but one in particular. And his story is one that I'm still very, very close with his family. And I share his story a lot because of what he experienced and how these practices of being trauma responsive, being neuro-informed, being culturally sensitive, how all of this kind of turned into it's almost hard to put into words. It was this case of walking this child and his family through some of the darkest days that they had, while at the same time watching my own energy be completely drained from that process and not knowing what was happening to me in the moment. And I talk about that being one of the reasons that when I got back to Kansas and I was teaching in the new school, that it was such a hard year, is because I was drained. I kind of became cynical in some ways, but I was also hyper vigilant in other ways. I felt like I was on an island all by myself at times when it came to some of these practices, because again, came from a
There's
very
still a
diverse
lot of
school.
educators out there that feel that
Yeah.
way today, right? Yeah.
Diverse school to a not diverse school, and so my viewpoints were different than a lot of people's, and I was really, really struggling with that. And it wasn't until I learned what secondary traumatic stress was and understood that that's what I was experiencing, that I started to feel like, okay, I'm good. I can get my feet back on the ground, and I got a good community of teachers around me. And then my teacher of the year team, somehow in one of those, the way the world works kind of things, our entire focus was on the decisive element quote by I never say his name correctly. I think it's Haim Janot, but it might be Ganat. It depends on where you hear it been said. I'm trying to find videos of him saying it. I can't find one. But that I am the decisive element in the classroom, right? It's my attitude that increases or decreases the energy of the room, that I get to make the decision every day if a child is built up or torn down, right? Like that was our focus as the teacher of the year team. And so as we traveled around the state, and I'm seeing so many other teachers in the same position I was in and that I was already climbing out of, it was this realization of I can be the voice for that. I don't have to be, I talk about this a lot, I don't have to be Miss Honey from Matilda for every single kid. That's unrealistic. But maybe I can help other people realize that they are Miss Honey for someone. And if I can remind them of that, and if I can help them build the skills and resources and take care of themselves in a way that does that, then I've elevated our profession even further than I could ever do so, sitting in a classroom, 30, 100 kids a year at a time.
You said something a few minutes ago that kind of stuck in my head. And again, I'm going to bear with us on the timeline here, because we're going to go all over the place. But you kind of made a reference to, perhaps as a child yourself, not always having the support that you needed. Talk to me a little bit about that, if you would, and what that looked like, and how maybe that helped to also influence probably not only the path, but some of the ideas that you would eventually begin to put into practice. What was your own experience like?
Yeah. So I was a twice exceptional student. So a little diagnoses with obsessive compulsive disorder and a little diagnoses of gifted, right? So high anxiety and smart, but a really good student. I learned how to be a good student right away. And I just always felt kind of under the radar, I guess, at school. The expectation was I could get it done. I could get it done quickly. It would be turned in, it'd be correct. And then I would just kind of find myself sitting. So school was not a place where I always felt highly engaged, but I did like the running under the radar part of it. And I think that I also at school, I was shy. Oh my gosh. The fact that I'm talking to you right now, or that I speak, I think about it a lot. If I get into I can stand on a stage of 1,500 people and speak absolutely no problem. And that is not something little Katie would have ever desired or seen doing in life. There's a story about me hiding behind a piano during a music concert one time because I didn't want to be on the stage. But that idea that I could just do all of that and not have expectations placed on me was really big for me. I didn't have to do anything other than bare minimum at school. And but I loved school. It's kind of this balance of
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I liked
But
being
but there was a certain level of stress and anxiety as
yeah.
well. Yeah, and given the work that we do, we often, of course, are hearing about the kids that are having the big behavior.
Mhm.
Um, and of course, I worry a lot about those kids and how to better meet and support their needs. But I worry equally as much about the kids who are on the other end of that, who are sometimes the shutdown kids, or the kids that are really masking and doing all they can to kind of keep it together under a lot of anxiety and stress and all of that as well. Because the child that has the big behavior, sometimes their needs are seen. Now, I'm not saying they're always addressed appropriately,
Right.
but other kids, especially kids that academically, I think about my daughter here, where academically she no problem meeting and exceeding demands, but would find it very difficult. And so it's interesting how that can work. And I think people
Mhm.
sometimes forget about the kid that may be meeting all the expectations, but really is still having an equally difficult time.
Yeah. Yeah. Later through school, I ended up experiencing several things that would make it onto the ACE list. And I, I guess I just made the assumption that everybody knew, but nobody asked. And I don't think that's true. When I look back now on those things, I think maybe teachers honestly didn't know.
Mm.
But I always felt like they did. I always felt like they were big enough things in our small town that people understood what had happened and nobody knew how to ask. And so that became a big piece for me too. It's just those kids who are experiencing little small things. Some of the
Mm.
ACEs are small things.
Right, right.
We like to think that's this big list, but something like divorce is not.
Sure,
We see
sure,
it as kind of
sure.
like, your parents got divorced. That's an adult problem, right?
Right, right,
Um, and so that was part of it too. Just this idea that I could hide there, but I could hide there, right?
right, right.
It was a dual-edged sword for me for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I see you have a fan out there, Becca,
I
who
see
we both
Becca.
know. So,
Yeah.
hi, and called you Queen. So, Becca, it's good to have you here. And again, if you're watching live, feel free to say hello in the chat. It's good to see who you are. So let's move forward a little bit. And I know we're going back and forth, but you say things that I'm like, I'm going to pull in that thread a little bit here. One of the things that you were talking about, kind of as you began to go into consulting and coaching, the pathway this seems to have followed, and I'm going to say seems to have followed because I have some evidence in front of me that's going to make me draw that conclusion. But my assumption is, you were on your own journey. You began to learn a lot of these things, diving into trauma, diving into the neuroscience, diving into the work of people like Bruce Perry and others that you mentioned.
Mhm.
At some point, kind of based on your own experiences, certainly as an educator, perhaps even influenced by some of the things as a student, you go into consulting and you begin to put together the practices, the things that you're recommending. You begin to build out your own approach to helping
Mhm.
and supporting the educators that you're supporting. Tell me a little bit about that foundation, and where I'm sure that all leads is ultimately really into Rooted in Hope, which is
Yeah.
not only the name of your book here, but really the approach that you have in working with and supporting teachers. So tell me a little bit about the evolution of your work as you became a consultant. And I'm sure that kind of over the years that this body of work just kind of continued to build upon itself. But tell me a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah. So I really the journey as the consultant started to grow exponentially when I connected with Jim Sportleader.
Mm-hmm.
So Jim and I worked together on a project for Children's Policy and Law Initiative of Indiana,
Mm-hmm.
which
And
is a
for those that don't know
fabulous
Jim,
yes.
would you just say a little bit about who Jim is, just so that
So
they're aware?
Jim
I mean, you
Sportleader
say
is
Jim, I'm like, yes, but
yes, and
right,
who?
right.
Jim Sportleader, we call him. He's the OG. He is the original trauma-informed father of the group of people that I follow.
I've heard goat
He,
used as well. Greatest of
yeah,
all
yeah,
time.
go, yeah. He's also just a dear personal friend, right? So his book, The Trauma-Informed Schools Administrator's Guide, it has a long title, and I probably botched it, but Guy can clear that up for me later, I'm sure. He created that. He wrote that book with Heather Forbes, and then there was a film, Paper Tigers, about his school and his experience. And he was consulting with CPLI from Indiana, which is a wonderful group that advocates against and for or against, I suppose, any law that would be harmful to students or children in the state of Indiana. They are an amazing group, and they have the Positive School Discipline Institute. So I started working with them and helping them develop their curriculum and their framework. And Jim and I really began to explore how our works supported one another, right? And when he retired, it was an opportunity for him to kind of move into a beautiful retirement. And then James Moffett and I seemed to kind of have the blessing to continue his work forward, right? So I like to think of it as I'm his child carrying forward his legacy. And in that, through the work with CPLI, that's really where the Rooted in Hope framework became to flourish. Was I sat down and I'm looking at, everything I believe and everything that I do, and I'm trying to think, how do I repackage all of this? How do I take what my thoughts are and just kind of identify a new way to view this idea that we have to take care of the teacher first, but those same practices would then have to be good for students. And I started writing things down, and the idea of hope is actually well ingrained into me. I studied under Dr. Shane Lopez while I was at KU, and his work is the seminal research on hope. So I knew that hope was going to be in there somewhere. And as I started writing down words about, okay, so this is what I think this is, and this is what I think this is. And then I'll be honest, as I started looking at words and thinking, okay, how do I repackage that in today's climate? What would I say that this is? And how do I see this? And all of a sudden I had the word rooted written down. And I was like, okay, cool. Like those all make the word rooted. And then the framework was created at that point. So Rooted in Hope is resilience, origin, openness, trust, discernment. Oops, sorry, I skipped E. Trust, empowerment, discernment, intentionality, neuro-informed practices, hope, ownership, purpose, and engagement. Mm-hmm. And what I have found is that those 12 things, I get it, I'm breaking every acronym rule in the world, but those 12 things, if we can look at school policy through that lens, we're going to be in a better place. If we can look at curriculum, we're in a better place. If I do conversations with people and I'm including those 12 facets, they're going to touch every touch point I need when I'm making a plan for a student. I've been able to use that same framework clinically, education-wise, creating resources. To me, they are the 12 most important principles in our work.
Yeah, no, love that. Yeah, and love the origin story with Jim as well, who's a wonderful human being, and we've had him on the podcast as well before. But just reflecting back on being recently at the Attachment Trauma Network, it wasn't the same without Jim there. I mean,
it wasn't.
Great. And the film I still find very impactful, and I think for helping people kind of begin on this journey, and that's the important part of this journey is really kind of beginning somewhere, right? It's easy for people to feel overwhelmed and hopeless, and the system is too big to fix. So I think kind of coming back to this idea of being rooted in hope, I think it's so critical to all of this work. One of the things that you mentioned here, and I think this is a critical aspect of all of this, is to a degree, you've got to start with the individual. You have to start with the educator. You have to start with the adult nervous system. Tell me a little bit more about, kind of that work, as you're, supporting. And I know, as of today, you're still very much in that role of consultant and coaching, correct? I mean, you're still actively working with districts and helping educators. Tell me, what that looks like, when you begin to, because when we think about the challenges, and you think about the challenges facing educators, often we see people beginning with the behavior or whatever the case may be. And that's not necessarily the right place to begin. So tell me, when you go in and you begin to work with a school or a district, how do you kind of bring this work, to them personally? Because I'm a big believer that when you begin to see some of these things yourself, even through your own experiences, it changes everything, whether it be trauma, whether it be understanding behavior differently. So what's that look like when you're working with educators?
Well, it's taken on a variety of different looks over the years, and what it looks like right now, what I'm actually working on right now, is a set of insight tools that really gives some of this a much more formal feel. So you can kind of think of it like Enneagram or Myers-Briggs for teachers. I have 7 insight tools that teachers use. They take those, and it gives us a look at kind of where are they in professional quality of life? Where are they in their belief of resilience practices? What does trust look like and feel like to them? And then they get this teacher archetype and this profile of who they are. And what that came out of was lots and lots of conversations with people over the years about those topics, right? Let's talk about what is it that's draining you? What is it that's filling you right now? What do you believe to be true? What do you believe is the purpose of education? What are the frustrations that you're experiencing right now? So I try to get a lot of that. And then we also talk about what was your own school experience like? What was it like growing up for you? What did you believe you were going to do as an educator? I think that so many of us come into this field bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and thinking we're going to just change the world for kids. And then we get in there and it's really hard. And we don't see the impact we've made sometimes for years later, right? And so that the goal, I suppose, is to help the educator see that path, right? So kind of like we've done today with me, we've done this choppy conversation of my timeline. And honestly, that's how a lot of my coaching conversations go, because I'm looking for one piece that pulls us back into, but wait, tell me about that one. Right. It's a process I call parable pathways. And it uses the Rooted in Hope framework. It uses those 12 elements to have people go back and they identify these pathways that they've traveled in life. And we do it through story. So tell me a little bit about this idea of resilience. Where did it come from? Where did it get built? Let's connect to the first time you remember feeling that way. How do you feel that way now? When does that show up for you? Do you miss that feeling? Is it a healthy place? Is it serving you or stealing from you? And so we're just having these rich conversations that kind of meld their personal, their professional, and their historical life all together so they can see, am I at a spot where this pace, place, and path are continuing to serve me? And do I need to clean up some things in my life? Do I need to make some changes to pace, place, or path in order to find a way that I'm going to be able to be served and continue serving others in whatever capacity? So it's kind of that's a very high look at what I do. But the goal is to help people go, okay, like I see why I make the choices I make. I see how I got to these places, and then ask themselves, how am I going to continue to grow? What do I need to do next? One of the things I tell people that doesn't always get a lot of smiles or thumbs up is that I can work with a teacher who is has a very traditional view of the purpose of education and has very traditional views on what discipline, which I would likely call punishment, look like in a school. I can work with that teacher, and I might even be able to at times say, okay, you are actually still getting really great results, and you're not actually punishing anybody because you've somehow built relationships where you're not having to use any of those strategies.
Right.
And because you haven't had to use any of those strategies, you haven't yet realized that they don't serve you or your students in the classroom. Let's talk about that and see how we shift, right? But that knowledge and understanding of who they are and what they believe is always the foundation point. I see no shame in that game. I see no reason to shame teachers for having these more traditional beliefs than I have now, if we're all willing to acknowledge where they came from and just explore, are they serving you? And how do we grow if they're not?
Yeah. And that's the important part right there. And are they serving you, and how do they grow if
and not just you, but your students?
Yeah. I mean, but it's such an important piece of this because, I think the answer to the question of sometimes of how our beliefs come to be is our beliefs came to be through our experiences, right? So we had a certain experience. We may have had an experience that, for instance, I think about, parenting, and, I've gone on a big shift away from, compliance-based approaches, rewarded and consequent, all of these different things. But that's how I was raised. I mean, I was raised in a certain way, and it's difficult to shift away from beliefs that you may have. But that question again, kind of is this really working? is important, because, time after time, if you really begin to deconstruct the things that we're doing when they're not working, and you ask that question, like, okay, well, these are the things that we're doing right now. Are they working? I think very often people do them because it's what they've been told to do. It's what they, what was done when they were kind of going through the system, whatever the case may be. But if they were really critical and step back, they might question whether or not they work. And, very often, what I see, and you probably do as well, when things aren't working, rather than pausing, reflecting, and thinking about why they're not working, very often we do more of the things that aren't working. We double down in the things that are working. We do them louder. We do them with bigger prizes. We do, and still they are not working. So I love that your kind of thoughtfulness about those questions. I think they're really critical.
Yeah.
The other thing that you said that, and you mentioned this early on when you were talking about even just kind of your journey and going to school and the competition and getting into certain programs, how many people wanted to get into, early childhood, early education programs. And I think we're in a really bad place right now, because these challenges are seen so much from the outside as well, that people aren't choosing to go into some of these fields like education anymore. And I'm a believer, and maybe I'm naive, but I'm going to hope that you're going to tell me that I'm not. But I'm a believer that we can actually make teaching joyful again. That when people begin to make some of these shifts, that there's so much at stake here, but there's so much that has the potential of really making education a joyful experience, that, I hate to see when we're in this position that it's not perceived in that way, and many aren't experiencing that way. How do we get there? How do we get back to that point?
Yeah. Well, you buy my book, and then no, I'm just kidding. But yes, we go back.
Where can people get your book, by the way?
Right now it's available on Amazon.
Okay. Great.
To find it. Yep.
Okay. I actually managed to get in person, and I got it signed and everything, so
it was the last copy too.
Yeah.
I sold out at the conference.
That's great.
So in that space though, right, it's coming back to the idea that, why did you do this? Why did you come back to teaching in the first place? Why are you here? And are we still able to do that? Gallup polls have showed us for years that teachers are one of the lowest engaged groups of professions. And it comes down to a couple of things. One, feeling like our voice is heard at school, feeling like we get appropriate feedback and praise for what we're doing, and that we have the resources to do our job. If we can get a couple of those taken care of, I can't give you all of the resources, but I can help us learn in your school culture how to build collective efficacy, how to feel like you're doing the right things, how to feel like you are, your administration is supporting you and you're supporting your administration. And I think that's where we see the joy, right? I've worked in really tough places with low budgets, and been very happy as an educator. And it's not all the resources, it's how well we're bonding together and doing the good for the kids.
Yeah.
We've lost part of that. And I'll be honest, I think the reason we've lost part of that is because of the movement that we're doing, right? This idea that we're going to do things that have to be done. Like we're going to end seclusion and restraint. That's the goal, right? Like we all agree that we need to do that. And if we do that before there are resources in place, then we're putting teachers in a harmful place, right? We're putting students in danger, we're putting teachers in danger. And that's where I'm hearing we're struggling, is that we have these ideas and people aren't taking the time to go in and do the professional learning and build the resources and all of that are needed to replace adult behavior. And so now we're kind of going, oh, hands off, we can't do anything anymore. And then we're feeling very disconnected from our job.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah, sure.
The goal is to come back and say, okay, how do we make sure that teachers are in a nervous system place where they're able to take in new learning as we replace the things that we're trying to get rid of in school, and then measure that. And I think that's a big piece that we're not doing, is we're measuring all these student outcomes, which we know how to measure, right? I mean, and so we're measuring student outcomes. We're not measuring at all the implementation of these practices to know if teachers are making the shifts. And then we're blaming the shifts on not changing student behavior, right? We're not measuring the right thing.
Right.
And so to make it joyful again, I think, honestly, I think that we need to take a step back from all of the change, take assessment on what's working, what's not working. And what I can tell you is not working is the mental health of our teachers is struggling. And we stop there for a little bit and we get people in a healthy place where they can take in learning. If we know the kids' brains can't learn when they're stressed, why are we asking the teachers to change while they are? It's not fair.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you bring up a great point. And, you know, while I'm, you know, excited to see that there's progress when it comes to bringing things like trauma-informed, trauma-sensitive practices to schools, it's still fairly low in total saturation. Like, you know, a lot of people have, you know, even in a conference like the conference we were both at, when I kind of asked the question, like, to get a gauge of how much experience people had, you know, you often find that there's not much, you know, there's not much of that getting yet to our educators. And I actually think that our higher ed programs are running sometimes decades behind in terms of what we should be teaching and equipping educators with. But, you know, that we're seeing some progress there. But, you know, one of the things that we talk about frequently is the fact that you can't just apply these principles and ideas to the kids that you're supporting. You have to start with the administration, with the teachers, with the staff. You can't simply learn about the impact of trauma and recognizing trauma and providing supports to try to, you know, you can't just simply do that for students if you're not also taking that same approach with your educators and with your administration. It really is about changing kind of the culture and the fabric of an entire organization, right? But, you know, very often it's, you know, okay, well, here's one more thing that we've got to learn and one more thing on our plate. And how are we going to do this all? So it is tough. And, you know, when you go into the kind of the neuroscience bit of it, I mean, you know, while trauma-informed practices have gotten some traction, you know, still very, very few people have any kind of exposure to that as well. So, you know, definitely some upstream changes that need to occur in preparing people, you know, better for these careers. But also, you know, these are not just about the things that you're doing to support kids. I mean, it starts with supporting the adult. Unsupported adults not able to really adequately support a child.
One of the analogies I use for this, though, to kind of give us maybe some hope, I don't know, is that I think about the dyslexia research in schools, right? So I don't know what y'all are doing in Maryland, but here, this is the last time I can renew my teaching license without taking another set of literacy courses to prove that I know the science of teaching reading, and right? Even though I have a master's degree in reading, I have to prove it again. And the reason is that schools are now going, oh, hold on, this dyslexia thing, you mean there is a way that we can treat it? There's a way that we can teach better? And the thing is that was considered settled science like in the 60s and 70s. They have known brain-wise how we learn to read and what needs to be done and all of those things decades ago, right? Like, I mean, I was -20 in the 60s. It wasn't around. And so my whole education career, I wasn't taught that way, and I wasn't necessarily taught to teach that way. So if it took that long let's just go with 1970, okay? 1970 to 2024 is kind of where Kansas started making this implementation. If we're going to talk, it took that many years, what is that, 55 years to get the science from this neuro world to the schools. And then we consider brain research, and we consider the decade of the brain was the late 90s to early 2000s. There's a little bit of like, okay, of course we're not all the way there yet. Right? But then the question becomes, can we learn from what we mistakenly did with dyslexia and speed up our process now, but also give ourselves a little bit of grace, knowing that the reason we didn't do any of this before is because it didn't exist. Right. When people tell me, well, everything we did worked well for me, cool. Kind of like those seatbelts that kept you alive, but didn't keep anybody else alive. Like you didn't have them back then. You survived. Cool. And now we know more. So let's do more. And I used to think that quote was such a cop out. It used to make me so mad. Do as well as you can until you know better.
Well, that's my favorite. It
used to make me so angry. Like, just know better now. Just know better now. But now I'm kind of like, okay, Katie, let's neuro-inform that one. Let's trauma responsive that one. We can only do as well as we can. We can only do
and I think that's what it's all about. I mean, do the best you can. And you know, when you know better, do better. I mean, I think, That's really what it's all about. It
It
really
is,
should
but
be
that
about
quote did
being.
used to make me mad.
Yeah. Well, it's about on every presentation I've ever given. I've always loved that. So I'll watch you for signs of triggering.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Okay. They're pretty evident.
That's right. So tell me a little bit more. Again, we talked about kind of you're going into consulting. Again, as you do that, you probably develop these ideas, you develop these things you present, and tell me a little bit more about the book. And, of course, this is a second edition as well. So what led to this book in the first place, and what is this book and who's it for?
Yeah, so the book is for any educator who is looking to support their own nervous system as they try to support students. The reason for the second edition is that I, oddly enough, or aptly enough, I rewrote my entire chapter on the brain after reading it, after it was published, and going, oh, I don't think I conveyed this as I wanted to. So that's why the second edition. I rewrote a couple of chapters. But the book really starts by, again, walking the educator through individual therapeutic type practices to help them assess, based on those insight tools I talked about, their own processes, their own beliefs, their own hangups, their own reasoning for being in education. And there's even a chapter in there on, are you sure you're supposed to still be here? Right? We have so many people leaving and they're jumping out before they've really made a solid, thoughtful choice. And so there's a chapter in there with a process to kind of help you make that decision if you're exploring the idea of leaving education. And how to get around the idea that we don't have marketable skills. That's something that was kind of drilled into some of us educators, is that those who can't do teach. And so what else am I going to do? And that's just not true. So there's the whole half of the book on that. And then we go into, great, now that your nervous system is in a better space and you have a good idea of why you do the things you do and what it is you want to move forward in doing with trauma responsive practice, neuro-informed practices, culturally responsive practices, all of the like. Now, how do we apply that to students who are in need of connection? How do we begin to develop? I love that the Bowmans are your sponsors for the podcast, right? This idea of your FBA is a fantasy. How do we move away from those traditional models and say, let's look at this student through the Rooted in Hope framework? What resilience factors do they have? What is their origin? What trust do they have in the building? How does their brain work? It really aligns also with the 5 principles, right? Are they all right there? And then how do we make sure those kids have empowerment and engagement and purpose? And all of our plans are now built through that framework, so that we're balancing the educator through Rooted in Hope, we're balancing the teacher or the student through Rooted in Hope, and the system. So then we begin to look at the system. Are our policies aligned with this? And the book walks you through all 3 of those processes. It's designed to be a book study in itself. So every chapter has a reflection, but then all 5 parts have a deeper reflection as well. So by the time you're done, you really have your own personalized framework to either implement in your school or just for yourself if you're an individual on this journey. And then those are tied to the insight tools, which you can take online. And those insight tools, again, for an individual, give you an idea, a deeper look at how you show up through the Read It Up framework. For a building, it's a really great measure of, are our teachers making the shifts they need to make in order to say that we're being successful in our implementation of trauma-informed, neuro-informed practices.
Gotcha. There's a lot here, and I've got my copy in front of me, so I'm kind of flipping through it as I go. But there's a lot here, and a lot of really valuable, not only kind of self-understanding and assessment, but kind of what are the things? Because this is the question, right? Well, what do I do? What are the things I can do? So I have the book open right now to chapter 28. Which is about competency and co-regulation. So give us a preview of that. What kind of things are you because you say co-regulation, and of course, some people may instantly, others may go, you might get an eye roll. And I've heard people kind of, what kind of things do you bring to educators to help them develop the skills needed to move beyond, just being there to really helping them to use their own nervous system to help soothe another?
Yeah. So within the competency and co-regulation chapter, one of the things we're talking about is kind of the connection and restoration process. So looking at this in a different way than your traditional escalation, right? I love the work of Lisa Feldman Barrett on the brain. And so I tried to pair a new way of looking at the escalation cycle and the co-regulation cycle with those brain shifts. So we talk in there about when is a student at capacity and when is the adult at capacity? What does strain look like? What might we see during adaptation, during overload, during recovery? How do we reflect at the end of a process, and what does reconnection look like? And we're pairing that with the stage of the stage of capacity and the brain state of flexibility. What are our observable behaviors and what adult responses, right? And so it gives you really just that actionable, these are your look fors. This is how you calm your nervous system. But then we also go into, in the stage of adaptation, we're working with kind of a protection state is emerging in the brain of the individual we're supporting, right? And this is where we want to shift some of that FBA language. So there are things our body is trying to do when it becomes dysregulated. And the way I've framed those is this person trying to seek, this is all for protection. Keep in mind, it all serves a purpose. Right. But is it seeking power? Is it seeking distance? Are they trying to seek certainty, like trying to get some stability? Is it connection? Or are they trying to conserve the energy they have and they're going to go hypervigilant or hypo aroused in the setting, right? And so it's reframing the way we look at that typical escalation cycle, trying to pair it back into a brain state to give people a better understanding of what works and what doesn't work here, while we also still hold on that there has to be accountability within this process. It's one of the big things I hear a lot in this work is that, well, we just give them all a lollipop and send them back to class. Okay, there's a chapter in here about lollipops back in class, that it might serve a purpose. Right? If I have a kiddo who has gone through a full escalation cycle and they are shut down, their body, they might need a quick source of protein and sugar. Right. I'm going to give them something. Right. I'm not going to send them back to class with it. And how do we teach the educator? How do we teach the administrator? And how do we teach the kids what all these tools are for? And so that's really what that chapter on co-regulation is about.
Yeah, I love it. So I'm going to ask you a question. I'm a big fan of Dr. Stuart Shanker, and one of his questions that I think works well for almost anything is the why and why now question. So tell me a little bit more about the book. I mean, why did you decide to write this? Why did you decide to write it now?
Well, I decided to write it because I felt like I was at a spot where I was being asked the questions and didn't have the capacity to do as much consulting work as I was being asked to do. So the natural response
to that
is
a good problem to have,
right? It is. It's a great problem to have. The one thing we haven't talked about is how consulting is actually my part-time job. I also serve full-time as a therapist for first responders in my city, and then I also work at a correctional facility as well. So this really is my side gig. And so that was why I have these things. I need to be able to get them out into a framework. And why, I guess that answers why now too, right? I think though, the larger answer is that, I want this work to be in the hands of as many people as possible in the most affordable way as possible. And honestly, we can all hire consultants to come out to our schools and do one day of professional learning. And that's great. Or perhaps we can start to use frameworks and give them access to frameworks that are more in a written form, an asynchronous form. And that frees them up to do the work and have conversations with their people and still have a budget to actually do the programs and that kind of thing. So that's another part of the reason is making sure that things remain accessible and affordable to our schools at a time where funding and time is at a premium price.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit about, and of course, I forgot about all your other obligations and careers. You got a lot going on, but tell me a little bit about kind of the work with schools. How might you engage? We have a lot of educators, administrators, other professionals that are part of our community here. If someone was interested in, rooted in hope, and they were interested in engaging with you for coaching or training, what kind of things do you do with school districts, and what does that look like?
So I do both consulting and coaching, both in person and virtually. So right now, the framework that I'm using actually is, I'm pretty excited. We're just launching it, and it is a set of micro credentials. So kind of you read the book. and we do a book study. And if that's usually my first stop. And then let me work with 2 to 8 of your teachers, depending on the size of your school, your district, the teams that you have. And I usually work with them virtually, and I'm going to just train them to then go back and train your staff. And so I like to work in that model to where your own people are designing for your community. And then from there, we've developed a set of micro-credentials that go along with that so that teachers can take those credentials. They're doing projects, they're identifying skills and showing how they're using them. And then I've tied that to college credit as well. And so what I try to do is a lot of asynchronous work, again, trying to keep it accessible and affordable so that, yes, I have all these other jobs that I do. My time is limited. I can maximize both of our times and both of our funds at the same time.
So you said you tied this to college credit. Do you have a partnership of some kind where people are able to apply for college credit for the credentials they're doing?
Yeah, we're working with a couple of schools. And so basically, like, the book study is available through North Dakota State University. You take the book study and then you can apply for graduate credit through their university. And it's a pretty simple process. And again, tried to pick somewhere that was reasonably priced for teachers and easy in and out, just to get those college credits for relicensure, moving on your salary schedule, whatever you need them for.
How often do those book studies, I mean, do you have cohorts that go through them, or how often do those happen?
Yep, my next cohort is going to start in October.
Okay.
But I'm trying to get it set up to where if a group wants to do the book study on their own, and let's say that you have a small team who's interested in doing it, that it is not based on a set time, it's based on a certain number of weeks, and that people will be able to start and end those book studies whenever they'd like.
Gotcha.
So that's the goal within the next few months. The next
how many weeks do they?
Be in October.
How many weeks do they usually go?
They are 8 weeks.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and basically, the book works. You read one part of the book.
Okay.
Every there's 5 parts, but only 4 of them. The last one's all reflection. So you read one part every 2 weeks.
Gotcha. And anyone, anywhere can sign up for the next
Absolutely.
one. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'll just mention, please share that with us when you have the signups available. We do our own book studies here at the Alliance as well, but always looking for opportunities for our educators and others that are interested in learning more. So we would be happy to share, post about the book studies that are coming up, because that's a really great opportunity. So let's turn back to a little bit of hope here. And again, these are challenging times in the world. These are challenging times in education. It seems like at times there is a deficit of hope. The world can feel pretty overwhelming. And when you're in a really difficult job, a really important and difficult job, without enough resources, and with, I feel for educators, because sometimes you're getting it from all angles in terms of critiques and opinions and ideas. And of course, there you are day to day, trying the best you can to support the kids that you are supporting. But thinking about where we are and thinking about some of the challenges, talk to me a little bit more about kind of your hope. What's your hope for the future? What's your hope for the work that you're doing as well?
So one of the things that I think that I hope becomes transparent as you read Rooted in Hope is that I really, truly believe and have experienced that hope is always the brightest inside the darkness. I've talked about that for years. It's one of my favorite keynotes to deliver. We only know hope when we feel like we're reaching the end of something. And there's hope is one of those things that is quantifiable both scripturally and scientifically, which I think is beautiful, because it means very few people can argue against it. And it's known to be the greatest predictor of success. So the cycle of hope is that there is suffering, there's perseverance, there's character, and there is hope. And I think that's what we're experiencing right now. Right now, we're in a world that is hurting, and a lot of us are hurting. And through that, what we're finding is that we are reaching for community, we're reaching for each other, we're reaching for ways to continue to work hard in any way possible, not work hard in a grit kind of way, but continue to put forth the effort to persevere through these challenges. And the character that I see that building within the education community is huge. The people who are staying, the people who are deciding to get in, the changes that are being made. The definition of hope is just the belief that the future is going to be better than the present. And I think that we have all of those elements right now. And so that's kind of where I'm at, is that if we can just continue to persevere through here and look for the character that's being built, we're always going to see the evidence that it's going to get better. It will. It has to.
Yeah,
we can do that.
Yeah, no, I love that. So I'm going to pause for a second, just remind people, if you're watching live, we're going to be wrapping up here fairly soon. But if you're watching live, if you have a question or a comment, you're welcome to put that in the chat. And we'll try to get to a couple questions if any are in the chat there. So what else is on the horizon for you? Are there other things? Do you have other, speaking events or other things that are people might want to learn about? What else is going on with you in the immediate near future, at least in this scope of work?
Yeah. So right now, I have kind of a series of podcasts that I'm going to be a guest on in the next few weeks, and so that's one piece. As kind of as far as speaking engagements are concerned,
Sure.
My conference schedule always winds down at this point of the year. I will be heading to Indiana and a few other school districts here coming up, and always looking for additional places to add to that schedule. So always happy to connect and that. And otherwise, I'll just be working on those insight tools, getting those up and running on the website and available for individuals, teams, or schools to pilot. So.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So I take that as if people are interested in booking you for a speaking event or in a conference or whatnot, they can reach out, and we just put your website up there as well, so they can reach out through your website. Look at that. That's a great URL. Sometimes, you don't get the URL you want, but it looks like you got it. You got the Katie McDonald website.
I did.
Yeah. And now there's probably a .com too. I want to make sure people don't go to that. So
yeah.
That could get a little risky. I remember back, years ago, you would buy like all three if you could. You get .com, .net, and of course now there's 100 different extensions you can get as well, which makes it a little bit challenging here. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. I think there's a lot of need for this work, and my feeling is that there's some really great things that people are doing out there, and I look at the need that's out there, and I look at approaches like yours, and I look at the work like people like the Bowmans that we mentioned earlier, and I think all of that work is needed, and I think it's really helpful to have so many people out there that are concerned and trying to make a difference here. And, our recent event here in Dallas that we were together, again, lots of people out there that are doing kind of this aligned work. And, I'm a bit agnostic in terms of like, I don't care what you do. I want you to do something, right? I mean, if you're an educator and it's a struggle and you're looking for a better way, and you're, certainly Rooted in Hope is a fantastic, resource, and maybe think about the book study. But, sometimes even in the overwhelm, it's a matter of taking that first step. And I think, to me, I mean, that's one of the catalysts of hope, right? Even Absolutely. If you're not, not far into the journey, having some thoughts, being able to collaborate. You mentioned early in the interview, something I hear often from educators that I, come in contact with through the work that we do. And you find people that are very much aligned with kind of trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive approaches. You find people that are kind of on that neuroscience, and increasingly more neurodiversity affirming work that's being done. And they may be in a school somewhere where they don't have a lot of others that yet, are kind of making that same journey. And it can feel really isolating. You can feel really lonely when you're the one trying, well, maybe this could be, trauma, or, trying to. Do you have any advice for educators, that are out there that, may feel isolated, may feel alone, may have been kind of diving into some of this work, but again, don't feel a sense of community? Any thought for educators that feel more connected to others?
Well, one is I think that there are some really great Facebook groups where you can join just to get that sense of community, right? So one is the Trauma-Informed Educators Network. And there you just start finding people. You just realize that you're not alone. The second is go just pick one of these conferences, right? Creating Trauma Sensitive Schools is a great one. There's there's Innovative Schools has a trauma informed strand. Find a conference and just start talking to people and build a community. And I say that because I am eternally blessed to have a group of about 16 other trauma informed. We're all consultants, but we're also all educators. And we've been together now for about 4 years in a text thread, and I couldn't do life without them. They are my people. And so if your people aren't right there next to you, go seek them out. Make somebody be your best friend. You'll find them at a conference. You'll find them somewhere and build your community. And sometimes it takes stepping out of your own comfort zone a little bit to do it. But once you do find them, they'll adopt you, and then you'll never be the same again.
Never be the same again. I love it. Yeah. I love it. Well, we are getting ready to wrap up here, and I really appreciate this conversation. I appreciate the work that you're doing. Great to have you here. And again, want to encourage our listeners to check out your work, check out the book. The book is Rooted in Hope. It's available on Amazon. 12 Practices for Resilience Building Educators. Really, I think a valuable resource and roadmap for people that are on this journey. As we wrap up here today, I want to give you an opportunity to share any final things that you want to share with us, or any parting words of wisdom.
I just really hope that everybody takes time over this summer to relax and rest and rejuvenate themselves, and also to kind of consider what will the next year bring, and how can you be an instrument of hope as you walk back into those schools.
And I have to ask you, as someone who has 2 other jobs, are you also taking that advice and relaxing and
You're so funny, Guy.
I'm sure the answer is yes. I
just had the most rejuvenating trip to Dallas, right?
That's right. But it involved travel, and travel makes you tired. I mean,
it does make you tired.
I got home and I looked at my stat for my ring. It's like, oh, I'm in sleep deficit here. I need some sleep.
Yeah.
Well, listen, it's been great talking to you here today, and I really appreciate the work you're doing. I'm going to ask you, if you would, to stick around, but we're gonna wrap up here and say goodbye to everybody else. And again, encourage you, if you've not already checked it out, you can find her on Amazon. Check out Katie's website as well. Check out the book, and thank you for joining us here today. So, Katie, we're going to say goodbye to everybody, and if you'll just hang around for one more second, I will thank you again one more time. So, thanks for joining us. We'll see you again, I think, next week, if I'm not mistaken, for another special episode.